Take a look at this. These are two future global temperature models calculated at the German Climate Computing Center. To me, this really seems all you need to know to make a simple choice. On the left is the moderately optimistic scenario with forceful and swift climate measures to keep the world's temperature somewhat under control. To the right, the business-as-usual scenario for a world that would still be powered by fossil fuels without climate action or a global plan for a sustainable planet that we could all still live and thrive on. Do we then really need more frightening images of cataclysmic floods, biblical droughts, or raging wildfires? Yet politicians still don't seem to be able to address, let alone tackle the problem, and the big polluters, well, they can keep on polluting legally, because so far there's no law against provoking climate change or wrecking our planet for that matter. My name is Nick Balthazar. I'm a Belgian TV and filmmaker, and ever since I saw Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth and helped procreate these two young Belgians, I've been a worried man. And a pretty frustrated climate activist, because whatever we did, however we protested, nothing seemed to be able to slam the brakes on our crazy race towards the ecological abyss. Then, with a small group of tired and slightly despondent activists, we met this fascinating Dutch lawyer, Roger Cox, and he had this wonderfully refreshing idea to tackle the climate crisis.
Luckily, we have a wise woman we can turn to. It's Lady Justice. She has proven herself through time, and she can point us a way out of this dangerous deadlock situation by using the law. And that as such, judicial intervention can become a very positive force for the protection of people and the planet.
Goedemorgen, gaat u zitten.
From a young age, I always liked to be outside. I had a strong love for nature. Walked the dog like 3 times a day at least. Often took my binoculars with me to look at the birds in our surroundings, hawks and buzzards. I always loved to watch birds of prey. It was something that I really loved to do, being out there. At the age of 8, I believe, I was very upset with the annual killings of baby seals in Canada for commercial reasons for their fur. That upset me a lot when I saw that. At a certain point, I started to collect autographs as a sign of support from the members of our town, sent to the government asking them to do something and stop that unnecessary killing.
I guess some people seem destined to become activists, or not. The bright, nature-loving kid Roger Cox, or Roger as the Dutch say, went on to study law, to become a promising hotshot lawyer in a big Dutch law firm and fall in love with another promising young lawyer, daughter of a petroleum engineer at Shell. They got married and went on to have 2 lovely daughters together and moved back to a nice house in the lush green hills of their native shire, Limburg.
We were both ambitious young lawyers when we met. I was a petrolhead at the time. We were basically just
living our lives
and
minding
working
our own
hard.
business.
Exactly. There was no hint, I would say, that at that period of time we would get involved in anything
Either
like
of
this.
us, no.
No, absolutely not.
The epiphany of sustainability was getting green electricity. That was it.
Then, just like I did, they made the same mistake of going to see that terrifying and most inconvenient film.
Our ability to live is what is at stake.
That was when I sort of fell off my chair. I didn't grasp that problem at all.
until 2006. Before that time, I thought it was a non-issue, really. A bit of sea level rise wouldn't matter, that 1 or 2 degrees warmer wouldn't matter. Also being a parent of 2 young children, you know you have to do something, because 20 years down the road, they will ask me the question, well, didn't you know? And if you knew, why didn't you do anything about it?
And their part, they sure did. Organizing nationwide screenings of this inconvenient truth that had shaken their lives, organizing conferences on the circular economy. Roger even writes a book, Revolution Justified, or Why Just Maybe Only the Law Can Save Us Now.
We started with things that were totally outside our comfort zone. We're both lawyers. I mean, it was like 5 full-time jobs per person. We were working day and night. It was idiotic, really. You have to find a way to do this work within the things you know as a lawyer. And I think probably this was a little seed planted.
At one point, the basic realization was that if all is true, what I'm reading here in these IPCC reports, well, this is just one big endangerment situation that is being created. And this is when we start talking about the duty of care, which is an obligation for everybody. Nobody is allowed to create dangers for others if these dangers can be prevented.
Across the ocean in the US, there's another lawyer, Julia Olson, who's working on similar ideas, and with the Juliana case, files a by now historic lawsuit brought by 21 youth plaintiffs against the United States for its failure to act on climate.
As temperatures increase, sea levels rise, storms become more intense and frequent, and the coral reefs and fisheries upon which we depend disappear. The oceanfront land that my family has inhabited for generations and that I'm supposed to inherit will be underwater if the US federal government continues to promote a fossil fuel-based energy system.
Roger Cox sent me his book, Revolution Justified, and reached out to me because he saw the work we were starting to do at our Children's Trust and our first case against the US government. And he had been thinking along parallel lines of really using the law to protect people from the climate crisis.
And so this bold theory of a climate revolution through the law is put into practice. Because together with the Urgenda Foundation and with the support of more than 900 citizens, they actually sued the Dutch government for its lack of a forceful climate policy that aligns with the Paris Agreement. The petition is a revolution in itself. Can a court force the state to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions far beyond its own targets?
In the Urgenda case, Roger presented the science. Something that Roger and I both have agreed upon for a long time is we need to be telling the truth to these judges and to the public about what the scientists are saying.
Roger Cox's legal theories were quite revolutionary. When I first saw his book, Revolution Justified, I loved the idea, but I was very skeptical that it would get anywhere.
All other people thought it was nonsense, not possible, a PR stunt, or whatever they have said in the press. A lot of professors who said to newspapers, this is impossible, and blah, blah, blah.
Well, it might seem an aggressive deed to sue your own government, but I think that giving short-term politics and giving how media operates, etc., the courtroom is really the only place in society where you cannot just say anything that you want. Anything that you say needs to be backed up with evidence.
And then the district court in The Hague, City of Peace and Justice, writes history.
De rechtbank beveelt de staat dat de uitstoot in Nederland in het jaar 2020 zal zijn gereduceerd met ten minste 25% ten opzichte van het jaar 1990.
Ongelooflijk. We hebben zo hard gewerkt voor deze zaak en het is uiteindelijk zo'n groot maatschappelijk belang waar het hier over gaat. Dat ik er niks aan kan doen dat ik even mijn professionaliteit hier verlies.
When the decision came out, I practically fell off my chair. It was the first time any court in the world had said that there is a right to a safe climate system, and then to go the next step and tell the government that it had to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was a revolutionary decision.
And every time I see it, I get tears in my eyes because it's such a special moment.
And what it demonstrated is that judges say, yes, the government has knowingly endangered its people.
It felt like the dam had broken somehow. After all of those cases and all of that time that was spent and a lot of lawyers around the world trying to work this out, a switch had flicked, if you will, and the system was going to change.
Within half an hour, it was all over the world.
It inspired lawyers and activists all around the world, and it has inspired some judges to take further action, bolder than anyone thought that they would really take.
The part of Asia that my family is from and much of my family continues to live in, which is Bangladesh, is at the forefront of the impacts of climate change. That was the sort of backdrop to hearing about the Urgenda decision, and it just seemed like such a huge breakthrough, and I thought, you know, this is exactly the kind of thing that we need if we're going to really have meaningful accountability for the promises that governments have made year on year to take the climate crisis seriously, but have completely failed to deliver on.
Het heeft heel veel losgemaakt. Het is tot een parlementaire behandeling gekomen. Het vonnis heeft eigenlijk heel veel bijval vanuit de politiek gekregen.
And so this is where Roger's ideas spill over to neighboring countries like Belgium, and where I even entered the story. Because after hearing about the inspirational consequences of the Urgenda outcome, 11 concerned citizens in Belgium, me being one of them, decided to start up their own climate case against the Belgian government. Or governments, we have several in Belgium, you should know.
Eigenlijk je grootste vrees zou zijn, is dat ondanks dat je een solide zaak hebt vanuit juridisch perspectief, dat een rechter het niet aandurft om die lijn te volgen.
Yeah, Roger is a real hero. He's like the guy from The Insider fighting the tobacco industry on his own. He's been at it since 10 years. And now around the world, what he initiated resonates. He's helping us and teams around the world in getting their acts together. He set something in motion that cannot be stopped, and upon which I think we will look back as you know, being a really pivotal, defining moment in climate action.
And as our Belgian climate case is joined by no less than 58,000 co-plaintiffs, other countries all around the world follow suit. From Canada to Colombia, from New Zealand to Ireland and Norway, similar cases are brought to court. In Switzerland, it's senior women, in Portugal, youth, in France, celebrities, often rallying thousands of co-claimants. But maybe one of the most remarkable stories in climate litigation starts here, on the tiny German island of Pellworm in the Baltic Sea. It's a story of young farmers trying to protect their family farm against the rising seas by taking the German government to the Constitutional Court, where eventually they're joined by the thousands of young climate activists that are taking to the streets, fired up by the charismatic Luisa Neubauer.
The Baxen family live on this island, they have a farm, and this is something with a deadline really, because given the current scenarios and the climate crisis, at some point on this island you won't be able to farm anymore. They will effectively have to fight with this front line that is right in front of their doorstep really.
And that's really exciting, that these cases are not just a single plaintiff, they're broad coalitions of youth, grandmothers, mums, you know, ordinary people, NGOs, think tanks coming together. Demand for justice has to be made for justice to be delivered. You know, it's not just something that's sort of like Moses comes down from the mountain with 2 tablets and here, ta-da, here they are. You know, justice is actually made, laws are made as much by citizens demanding that justice is done.
In the Dutch Urgenda case, the verdict is, as they say, provisionally enforceable, meaning the Dutch government has to take immediate measures and actually starts closing down coal-fired power plants and making major new investments in renewable energy. Still, at the same time, the state decides to appeal the judgment, and upon losing for a second time, they finally turn to the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court decides that the order to the Dutch state, issued by the District Court and confirmed by the Court of Appeal, is definitively upheld.
For then Urgenda to win that appeal, it just kind of really solidified the outcome.
When I first heard about cases like Roger's case, I kind of thought this was a very symbolic thing to do. I didn't quite grasp the magnitude of what those court cases could be.
Governments had decided what's an appropriate level of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The court said, at that level of reduction, we're going to have a global catastrophe.
Een grotere opwarming van de aarde kan zeer schadelijke gevolgen hebben. Zoals extreme hitte of droogte, extreme neerslag, verstoring van ecosystemen en stijging van de zeespiegel. Ook kan die opwarming leiden tot klimaatomslagen, waarbij het klimaat abrupt en ingrijpend verandert. Door dit alles worden de levens, het welzijn en de woonomgeving van velen bedreigd. Wereldwijd en ook in Nederland.
Now, what always made this story even more fascinating to me is that this fierce climate lawyer married into a deeply rooted Shell family, his wife Saskia being the daughter of a lifelong petroleum engineer at Royal Dutch Shell. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but Roger's mother-in-law is still very much alive.
Dit zijn allemaal Shell-mensen. Ja. Dus dat was één grote kliek.
In al die landen waar we zaten, Venezuela, Nigeria, Turkije.
Borneo, Brunei, ja.
En Sarawak. Ja, het was een goede tijd. Dus wat dat betreft hebben we natuurlijk enorm geboft. Je stond klaar voor de Shell en dat vond je doodgewoon.
Ik denk dat later als dan de milieuhoek zeg maar heel erg gaat schoppen, dan denk je van, waar heb je het over? We doen hartstikke goede dingen en dat gaat niet over onze Shell. Want ik denk dat heel veel mensen die daar werkten ook van trots vervuld waren dat ze iets aan het opbouwen waren. En pas later ging het kwartje vallen.
Het is wel goed om te beseffen dat eind jaren 80 en ook in de jaren 90... Shell eigenlijk niet onder stoelen of banken gestoken heeft dat klimaatverandering een probleem is en dat hun producten daaraan bijdragen. En ze hebben in die tijd ook de signalen afgegeven dat ze daar ook verantwoordelijkheid voor wilden dragen.
Maar er is een klimaatfilm die Shell al gemaakt heeft, ooit, in de jaren 80. Volgens mij weet jij dat.
Dat wist ik niet,
nee.
Echt niet.
Nee. Dat is de eerste klimaatfilm die ooit gemaakt is. Ja. Shell zelf waarschuwt in die film voor klimaatverandering.
These models contain many uncertainties, but they forecast that by 2050, global mean temperature could have increased by at least 1.5 degrees, possibly near 4. If the threat of global warming is to be realistically addressed, the future will need to be different.
En toen zijn ze bezig gegaan met verandering binnen Shell. En er zijn allerlei projecten ontstaan, ook renewable energy projecten binnen Shell. En die zijn later, volgens mij begin 2000, zijn die allemaal weer gestopt binnen Shell.
En dat vind ik wel belangrijk, dat het verwijt dat dan Shell gemaakt wordt niet zozeer betrekking heeft op de jaren 80 en de begin jaren 90, maar met name dat men die kennis die men toen had en toen ook feitelijk ten goede leek te willen gaan gebruiken, in de jaren daarna met die kennis juist de verkeerde kant op bewogen heeft. En uiteindelijk in 2009 ook het meest CO2-vervuilende bedrijf in de wereld werd.
Then came the Paris Agreement, where the whole world vowed to globally reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. But in Holland, Shell's CEO Ben van Beurden had this reaction in a by now almost infamous interview on Dutch TV.
Uiteindelijk gaat het er in onze sector om dat wij het aanbod aanleveren wat uiteindelijk de samenleving vraagt aan ons. De samenleving vraagt op dit moment om een verdubbeling van de energie. En die moeten wij zo efficiënt en zo koolstofarm mogelijk kunnen aanleveren. En dat is ons beleid.
Ik constateer dat dat voor u op dit moment nog niet betekent dat u minder olie en gas wil gaan oppompen.
Ik pomp alles op wat ik kan oppompen om de vraag te vervullen wat dat betreft.
Maar je zal toch een bijdrage moeten leveren? Of heeft Parijs helemaal geen effect voor uw bedrijfsvoering voort?
Ja, natuurlijk zullen we een bijdrage leveren. En die bijdrage die gaat hem voornamelijk zitten in het ten eerste aansporen van realistisch beleidsmaatregelen. Dus inderdaad, wat we zeiden...
Maar concreet, gaat u ook... Want het meeste helpt natuurlijk als u minder olie en gas zou gaan oppompen.
Nee, ik denk het niet. Het beste is als we minder olie en gas gaan verbranden en minder steenkolen gaan verbranden.
I was watching it and said, well, this is the last straw of evidence as far as I'm concerned that we need in order to start suing this company. We're in the business of making money. It doesn't matter if we ruin the world by doing that. They shy away from any responsibility, make sure that the consumer feels that responsibility, but obviously the consumer can do nothing about that systemic change or little. And these are the big players who rule whether or not these systems will change. We need to create a lever again to pressure this and similar companies.
Even if we accept there's maybe some public duty of care on a state, how can you try to make that same case against a private company like Shell?
Royal Dutch Shell emits many times the amount of CO2 that the whole Dutch society does. About 2% of all global emissions are related to Royal Dutch Shell. So in a way, they're even bigger than most countries.
So you don't take them at their word when they say Shell wants to be a green energy company, they've set their own targets.
They've said this from the 1990s already. Shell even had large advertisements in the Financial Times, etc., stating, well, we have to move away from oil and gas and into renewables. So here it is, Shell Renewables. And a few years later, they shifted their investment to tar sands and shale gas and what have you. So no, their word is far from good enough.
And so in April 2019, the summons is delivered to the Shell headquarters with the support of 6 other NGOs, more than 17,000 citizen co-claimants, and Roger's 3 young associates.
From the moment I became a mother, this case became also personal for me. I felt a strong responsibility to do something.
The world is on fire, so to speak. All hands are on deck, and it's quite obvious that we have to do something really new.
It would be a breakthrough in so many legal areas that it's quite difficult to envision winning, but it would be a huge leap forward, and that makes it perhaps a bit unreal to me.
He doesn't have the kind of legal resources, obviously, that Shell do. You know, these phalanxes of lawyers, these hugely expensive legal firms that they hire, and many, many of them. And I think that's one of the things that really needs to be addressed here is this is public interest law, and it shouldn't be decided on the basis of who has access to the most money. It should be decided on who's bringing the right case.
The big fossil fuel companies who are among, the richest, most powerful companies in the world have been incredibly well positioned, not just to fight these cases in court, but also to shape laws and policies themselves.
If you look at the examples of the tobacco companies, that was how they managed to keep that litigation at bay for so long, was just the scale of the resources they could bring. We're now in the same position with the connection between CO2 and climate change. There's no question on the science. It hasn't been, for over a century, and yet here we are, emissions are still rising.
Sometimes, all of a sudden, you notice that there's some anger creeping into those words. But you want to win cases based on arguments, not on emotions, obviously. When I was studying law, corporate law, the business as such was much more appealing to me at that particular time than any social issue whatsoever. I also could have become a person like Ben van Beurden, for sure. But I'm a lawyer. I'm looking at it from a legal perspective, from an aspect of human rights and the duty of care. Is this what a prudent man should do, given all the information that is out there? And we're saying from now on, there is no way that you can, from a norms and value approach, you can excuse yourself from following that path. No way. Organizations like Shell and Total and BP and ExxonMobil and their industry associations have spent all their money blocking this transformation. These big players need to be forced to change.
Ik kreeg zojuist een melding dat er gefilmd werd hier zo bij ons. En dat mag niet.
Op de openbare weg? En u werkt voor Shell?
Zeker.
Oh, yeah. If only filming the outside of Shell's headquarters poses a problem, getting anyone there to speak to us, let alone CEO Ben van Beurden, after months of trying hard, seems to be out of the question. So I guess we'll have to hear or see them in court.
Zo, dames. Ciao.
Succes.
Roger and I read his book many years ago and totally agree that actually these companies are complicit and they have willingly covered up climate evidence. They knew that their toxic product was causing and would cause huge amounts of damage and they carried on regardless. So I hope there is a court brave enough to recognise that and that the demand for justice will be met.
A lot of the cases are about trying to recover money damages from companies that have profited off of the destruction of the planet. And Roger's new case against Shell, it's trying to compel these companies to also force a decline in emissions and to begin a transition to a different model of doing business.
You realize what you started, that you started a court case against a multi-billion company that has the resources to invest in the best lawyers and the best researchers in the world to ensure that they win. 25 companies are responsible for 50% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. And if the judge orders Shell to take its responsibility to reduce climate change, it will be the first step to address all of the biggest polluters that are currently outside of the global climate action.
Eisers hebben deze procedure aangespannen omdat zij vinden dat RDS te weinig doet aan het terugdringen van de CO2-uitstoot en daarmee aan het voorkomen van ernstige klimaatschade.
And off they went in this bizarre COVID courtroom for 4 long days of impressively thorough hearings. Shell's most important point: how could the claimants prove that the consequences of climate change are the result of the operations of Royal Dutch Shell? Or in short, RDS.
De samenleving als geheel stoot CO2 uit. Het risico op gevaarlijke klimaatverandering is dus het gevolg van het handelen van iedereen in de samenleving en niet alleen van RDS. Het gebruik van olie en gas is vooralsnog essentieel voor het functioneren van de samenleving. Maar dat betekent dus niet dat RDS niet feitelijk ambities heeft die verder reiken dan dat.
Ja. Het is kort gezegd niet zo dat Shell stil zit hangende overheidsbeleid. Hoeveel stappen je kan zetten en hoe ver je kan gaan hangt wel uiteindelijk echt met dat beleid samen.
But then the data seem to paint another picture.
De absolute emissies tussen 2016 en 2019 zijn met 5,4% toegenomen. En als je dat dan bijvoorbeeld extrapoleert tot 2035, dan kom je op een emissiegroei van 34,2% uit. Wij zien ook dat de voorgenomen investeringen in olie- en gasproductie tot 38% in 2030 kunnen oplopen, terwijl er echt gewoon gedaald moet worden. De wereld kent nog maar één ding: er moeten emissies gereduceerd worden in absolute zin.
A pivotal moment occurs when Shell's attorneys start to question not the science per se, but the way Roger Cox's team portray the scientific data around the dangerous cascade of climate tipping points as far too catastrophic.
Ze wijzen er dan op, dat wordt gewaarschuwd, dat als die cascade is ingezet, het klimaat nauwelijks meer terug te brengen is. Dat is wat ze noemen hothouse earth. Die stelling berust simpelweg op een verkeerde lezing van de aangehaalde bron. Dat laat onverlet dat het belang van het aanpakken van klimaatverandering buiten kijf staat en dat RDS haar rol in de maatschappelijke energietransitie speelt en wil spelen. Dank u wel.
Een half uur hadden we. Er zijn zoveel meer verweren die we zelf bedacht hebben, die we zouden kunnen voeren, en dan is het dit.
Maar ik denk eerlijk gezegd dat dit een fantastische ontwikkeling is. De essentie ligt hem erin dat de hele mondiale gemeenschap op basis van IPCC-gegevens heeft aangegeven: dat we die 1,5 graden niet moeten overstijgen. Dat is de mondiale consensus en dat is dus prachtig om op door te kunnen bouwen.
En wat wij zeggen moeten we ook voldoende aangetoond hebben. En wat zij doen is twijfel zaaien.
Ja,
dus
want als de twijfel ontstaat bij de rechters dat wij...
Niet weten waar we het over hebben.
Dit gaat enorm ricocheren in de richting van Shell.
Ja.
Misschien willen ze veroordeeld worden. Ik was hier heel gelukkig mee.
Ja, dit is nou ja, sterker nog. Ik ben echt veel geruster nu.
Ja,
dat zou je mensen...
Storing heeft er niet mee geholpen.
Yes, baby.
Teamwork, buddy. Ja.
Het is ook niet in te zien waarom de hele wereld catastrofale klimaatveranderingen zou moeten ondergaan, omdat het voor Shell en andere grote uitstoters van CO2 te bezwaarlijk zou zijn om te veranderen. Maar er is geen document in de wereld te vinden waarin staat dat iemand het business as usual scenario zou willen nastreven met alle consequenties die daarmee verbonden zijn, behalve een aantal grote olie- en gas majors en behalve de kolenindustrie. En we zijn allemaal met elkaar verbonden, er is geen land en eiland, dus we gaan het allemaal ondervinden. En dat is waar deze zaak over gaat.
De gedachte dat Shell beleid naar haar hand kan zetten en zo regulering voorkomt, is uit de lucht gegrepen. De rechter wordt door Milieudefensie evenwel geconfronteerd met keuzes die politiek van aard zijn en wel van stelselniveau. Die moet niet de rechter, maar de politiek maken. En de vorderingen moeten worden afgewezen. Dank u wel.
After 4 long days, it's time for the closing arguments. But the plaintiffs choose to give final say to a crucial witness.
Als jongere wil je niet druk maken over gevaarlijke klimaatverandering. Maar ik heb geen keus. Wij hebben geen keus. Want de waarheid is dat klimaatverandering onlosmakelijk verbonden is met onze toekomst. Jongeren hebben de toekomst, wordt vaak gezegd. Maar wat hebben we bitter weinig over die toekomst te zeggen? Beslissingen worden vaak voor ons genomen. Ook de beslissingen die hier in de rechtbank worden genomen, bepalen hoe de wereld van morgen eruit gaat zien. Nu is het moment. De beslissingen en daden in dit decennium bepalen onze toekomst. En die toekomst ziet er een stuk rooskleuriger uit als Shell echt mee gaat doen. Ik sta hier zodat we een toekomst hebben. Dank u wel.
Dank u wel.
Ja, dank u. Wij hebben even overleg gehad. Wij gaan het net zo kort houden als meester Cox tot nu toe zojuist heeft gedaan. Dus daar laat RDS het dan vandaag bij.
26 mei is de uitspraakdatum.
Wat een teamwork, hè, jongen. Ja.
And then, after no less than 6 years, yes, 6 years of legal maneuvering to stall the proceedings, our Belgian climate case finally has its day in court. The stage is the former NATO headquarters in Brussels, acting as an improvised courthouse.
Sitting here in the temporary Palais de Justice in Brussels, it's taken us 6 years to get here, and we'll have 9 days of hearings, and then who knows how many months before a decision. There is a long way to go, and these things are slow.
Dag Lily, hoi. Ik ga toch even zo met een aantal mensen doen, want dan hebben we dat toch maar even gehad.
But I think what the legal cases can do is bring a pressure, and it becomes clear that there is real momentum behind this as a legal issue. Then it will start to change behavior.
We really have something like 58,000 people in the case, and they really are over all ages within the population.
And if it works well, it's quite spectacular. Like in the Netherlands, it is actually depoliticized, this whole climate action thing.
It's dangerous to speak in terms of we have the truth on our side. What we can say is we do have the evidence on our side, and the evidence is clear. And although the window of opportunity is very small to get it solved, should seize it, and there's a lot at stake if we don't, and there's a lot to gain if we do.
Three months later, the court pronounces a powerful verdict by email and firmly rules that Belgium's consistent failure to meet its climate targets is indeed a violation against the duty of care and human rights, including those of all the co-plaintiffs in the case.
The court did hold that the Belgian government's current actions in relation to greenhouse gas emissions are unlawful under Belgian law, and every time it's incredibly important to set a precedent that other courts, other lawyers, other campaigners can be inspired by and draw upon in their own work.
There is a famous quote among activists that you should never underestimate the ability of a small group of committed citizens to change the world. But to make change in the world, that small group of committed citizens need an idea. And I think the key element was the theories that Roger brought to this case. The book that you chose to write was the inspiration that you gave to the court case and to the brilliant teamwork, and it's been magical to be a part of it. Thank you.
I think that this court ruling is a very important one, especially since this is the first case in the world where individuals are rewarded by the court for their claims. This is how ripple effects are created, I think. This is definitely something that other courts can then refer to and ground their own judgments on.
With some exuberance, our neighbors in France celebrate making history as well.
On l'a fait! On a gagné! Vous avez gagné!
L'inaction climatique de l'État est jugée illégale.
Avec l'affaire du siècle, nous venons ensemble de faire condamner l'État pour inaction climatique.
Not only Marion Cotillard and the French case of the century finds favor with the court, the number of climate cases worldwide keeps on growing.
It's comparable in some ways to the days of the cases against the big tobacco companies. Those cases failed and failed and failed and failed, and then they started to succeed. It feels to me like that momentum is built and that the waves are really starting to break now.
Also on the island of Belgium, where the Baxens and the whole German climate movement have had their share of legal defeats and disappointments, Louisa gets a phone call from their lawyer.
I was lying in bed and I had my phone there and I was just hearing this voice saying, "Louisa, we won this." And I was speechless. I couldn't believe it. It was so unlikely that the Constitutional Court of Germany would grant us the fundamental right to climate justice. It was incredible, beyond everything I could have imagined. I had forgotten, I think, how much it meant to people who genuinely care for the climate and who genuinely think we're losing it. And for them, it was a game changer.
A very, very big win. Also the fact that the Merkel government raised their climate plans for 2030 substantially, reducing that by 65% in 2030. That really shows that a government has to be as ambitious as necessary, not as ambitious as possible, because possible is also a vague term.
But as the German government raises its climate targets almost immediately and considerably, what happens on all the many levels of Belgian government? Basically, nothing. No change of plans or policy. In fact, no reaction whatsoever.
It's not only frustrating, I think it's very dangerous for a democracy based on the rule of law if even politics don't take court rulings seriously. So I think that is something that the Belgian government should not be very proud of.
So was this a victory or a defeat in disguise for Team Belgian Climate Case? Because though the court did recognize that the rights of our 58,000 co-claimants had been literally infringed, still, referring to the separation of powers, the judges refused to impose sanctions or concrete reduction targets. And because that, of course, is what the case is all about, we are appealing.
And that's where I feel the judiciary hasn't caught up. If it's still backing away, saying this is a political problem, it isn't. There is, clear legal principles that have been developed over time that they can rely on. And, 30 years that I've grown grey, frankly, is a lot of time for legal norms and legal rules to have developed. And it's for judges and tribunals to make those findings now.
I believe we're going to win in an hour's, 1.5 hours time.
Hope so.
Yeah. You have to create reality.
Speak it into existence. Yeah.
There's no question that big corporations have a lot of money to hire a lot of lawyers, but we now have a lot of very smart lawyers working on the other side.
I think if they just follow the normal practices that judges have followed throughout history, which is you hear the evidence, right? And then you apply really well-settled law to a new factual circumstance. And don't be daunted by the fact that billions of people's lives, are in the balance.
De rechtbank beveelt RDS om via het concernbeleid van de Shell-groep de CO2-uitstoot van de Shell-groep en van de toeleveranciers en de afnemers van die groep eind 2030 terug te brengen met netto 45%. Ik hoor buiten blije reacties. Ik sluit de zitting en de rechtbank zal zich terugtrekken.
Big oil.
This is huge news.
All of a sudden, boom.
This is a groundbreaking and historical verdict in our opinion. The first time that a large multinational company is ordered to reduce its emissions over the whole group in 80 countries. So I really think that this will have a huge impact on the energy transition.
Yes. It's phenomenal. It's an historical day. It's the first time in history that the court has decided that a major polluter should stop causing dangerous climate change.
Dit is echt heel erg fijn. Exactly what the doctor ordered.
Een enorme overwinning voor de milieu.
Ik weet eigenlijk ook nog niet of het bij mij wel eigenlijk echt ingedaald is.
CO2-uitstoot van de Shell-groep.
Maar het is echt een hele grote victorie, hoor. Dit gaat, denk ik, als het ook allemaal stand houdt, en daar ga ik vanuit, gaat dit echt een van de belangrijkste uitspraken wereldwijd in de afgelopen 50 jaar zijn, denk ik. Dus, cheers. Iedereen heeft daar heel hard aan bijgedragen. Er zijn ook slapeloze nachten geweest en al dat soort dingen meer. Maar als dit de victorie is, dan is het al die uren ook waard geweest. En al die jaren, ook voor sommigen van ons. Dus ik weet dat ze thuis ook heel vrolijk zullen zijn. Dat misschien nu toch iets kalmeert. Dus cheers, mates.
Ja, dat is oma. Hoi. Ik heb helaas geen apparatief meegenomen. Ja, dat had je wel kunnen doen.
Ik had heel veel voicemailberichtjes.
Ja.
Die eerste dag, maar die van jou was wel echt heel mooi.
Ja. Niemand trotser dan wij natuurlijk op jullie, want je hebt er zoveel offers voor gebracht. En dan maar hopen dat de oudere mensen zich daarin kunnen vinden.
Ja.
En dat is best lastig, want er zijn natuurlijk veel oudere mensen die zeggen, nou het zal mijn tijd wel uitduren. En die 17.000 burgers, dat zijn natuurlijk voornamelijk jongere mensen die zich daarin hebben verenigd.
Ja.
En die maken zich wel druk over de toekomst van de aarde en van het leven op aarde.
Ja.
En er zijn natuurlijk rampen overal, dus ook met het weer. Het is zo evident dat het allemaal aan het veranderen is. Dat kan je gewoon niet ontkennen, ook al zou je het nog zo graag willen.
And then the torrential rainfall that comes pouring down in the middle of summer takes its toll. For a change, not in the usual faraway places, but in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, even right where Roger lives.
It seems that climate change is already hitting us harder than most scientists expected. If you're not even safe anymore in your own house, if this can occur at any given moment, knowing that it will get worse anyways, we must do anything we can to make sure that this doesn't get much more out of hand. Hopefully it will be a wake-up call to many people. But I doubt that it will.
Powering progress. That's how I think about our role. That's what I believe we do, and we should continue to do. And that is what I think is the case for Shell. Powering Progress sets out a strategy to accelerate the transition of our business to a net zero emissions business, purposefully and profitably. Powering Progress delivers value for our shareholders, for our customers, and for wider society. And this includes supporting government policies to reduce carbon emissions sector by sector.
Obviously, they are changing in a few ways, but as the court has ruled, if you look at their ambitions, and if you look at their action plans and see what really is happening, it's still kind of misleading.
We believe the world can achieve net zero CO2 emissions to meet the goal of Paris if industry, government and society work together to make the right choices now. The energy system must change faster, and change is opportunity. Shell is acting today to be part of this future.
Then I start wondering, shouldn't we give Shell some credit? Isn't this the reaction to the verdict one would hope for?
It's just not about investing in renewables. Even in this case, it's only a small share. It's about how much is still invested in the oil and gas sector. That's the real point. That's the issue that's also relevant in the court case. It seemed to me that they didn't take that into account whatsoever, the possibility of losing a case like this. I think that the first 6 weeks or something like that, there was hardly any communication whatsoever. Afterwards, they have been raising their ambitions, but still far from what is needed to be Paris-aligned.
But while Ben vows to accelerate transition to net zero, Shell also decides to appeal against the ruling. Because a court judgment against a single company is not effective, they argue. Again, I wonder, don't they have a point? That singling out one polluter isn't really fair?
From a legal perspective, if you're violating the law, then it doesn't really matter if others are violating it as well. What matters is that you should address that violation. We have to be prepared, and probably even better prepared for the next round, because they will double down on their efforts as well to make sure that this case will be overruled. And we have to be on top of our game, for sure.
Then guess what? The little-known Dutch attorney Roger Cox is heralded by Time magazine, no less, as one of the world's 100 most influential people of the year, and a worldwide pioneer, together with another flying climate Dutchman, the European Vice President Frans Timmermans, godfather of the European Climate Programme, who comes from the exact same small Dutch town as Roger.
We are both children from the coal mining region, where people are used to working hard and speaking their minds and being very hard-headed. People like Roger Cox, they create new legal areas. If you know the history of the legal profession, very often people went into areas where others would say, that's crazy, there's no room for that. They're innovators. They don't ask why, they just ask why not.
And the man who sings his praise in the Times article is none other than the man who unknowingly sent Roger on his quest, and who now also introduces him in Edinburgh at a TED event about effective climate action. Yes, it's that same Al Gore.
I'm going to set the scene for a recent wave of successful lawsuits against fossil fuel companies and governments, and we'll hear more about this from Roger Cox, who led the successful lawsuits against Royal Dutch Shell this year, an historic precedent-setting case requiring Shell to cut its carbon emissions quickly and dramatically. Roger Cox. Roger?
Thank you for this kind introduction and for inviting me to speak today at this important event.
That was kind of nice, yeah, I must admit. Things are coming full circle in that way.
You're one of the most influential people of the year.
So they say, yes, yeah. Yes. Which is also a very nice acknowledgement for all the hard work that has been delivered by many people over the last 15 years. But there's many more cases to win, and we also have to make sure that we don't lose any of them, so it keeps us running. So yeah, but now we got to work.
After almost 2 years in his footsteps, I follow Roger to the city of that legendary accord, Paris, where he's working with the activist lawyers behind L'affaire à nous tous, the case for us all, who, as we saw, celebrated an important court victory against the state as well, and now, just like Roger went after Shell, they're going after the French oil and gas giant Total.
Your activity as a company is producing oil and gas. You decide on that activity, nobody else.
Total is judged by the Carbon Disclosure Project as the 19th biggest global polluter. Total is also the first big polluter in France and is responsible for at least as many emissions of CO2 than France is. So we really hope now that the French judges will again follow the lead of the Dutch judges and say that Total must as well be held accountable in favor of the climate.
We need to make the court feel comfortable with the fact that they can actually order a reduction target. They need to make sure that there is an effective remedy against any and all human rights violations. And the emission reductions is the only remedy. There is no other remedy.
When you face something like a state or a big company, you feel like you have no tool. You cannot do anything against them. But law is there, climate litigation is there to raise up to the challenge.
And I believe this is the future. This is the future of our legal system. We need to understand that those who do not protect the planet, those who actually harm the planet, should be held accountable for that.
We're seeing a steady increase in the volume of climate change litigation around the world. It's partly because some governments are actually imposing regulations and companies are pushing back against those regulations and trying to get relief from the courts.
By now, several automobile companies in Germany are facing court cases. And this will be something that will, expand. But this needs to be the warning for every company out there that they will face similar cases and they will be held accountable, not just by nice newsletters and petitions sent to them, but by court cases, one by one.
Then finally, to raise the stakes even higher, one of the future tricks up the sleeve of Roger's courtroom gown could be another legal revolution. The idea that CEOs and board members of polluting companies could from now on also be sued in a personal capacity.
Boards of big CO2 emitting corporations need to understand when they actively keep on pushing against climate regulation, greenwashing their business, that it might very well be the case that these directors will be personally liable next to the corporation as well. There's now a pool of successful cases, and let's hope that others will build on that, because we need hundreds, if not thousands of lawyers doing this kind of work and becoming much more involved.
And I can't wait for the judiciary to play its part too in understanding the complexities of the climate problem. Here are gases that have been known by science to cause enormous, irreparable damage, and we are letting the world down if we don't tackle that problem.
We're not powerless on this. The climate crisis isn't just laying on our shoulders, it's also in our hands. And that's something we need to, we very, very much mustn't forget. I think it's never been easier to get inspired.
We had climate litigation 1.0, if you will, in the Urgenda case. We had 2.0 now with the Shell case. And so there has to be a 3.0. And hopefully a few of these movements, like the climate litigation movement on the one hand, the youth movement, the movement of more climate activists, shareholders, large investors taking their money out of oil and gas. So if all these levers can accelerate the speed in which they are effective, then nothing is impossible, I would say.
A hopeful message in the end.
There you go. Every one of us has the potential to create ripple effects. Everything you say counts, everything you do counts, everything counts.